Hello, and welcome to You Can Grow Your Own Way, a conversation for parents and carers of neurodivergent children. I feel so privileged you are taking time out of your busy life to learn all about the ways to interpret neurodivergence for you and your child. Remember, all advice on this podcast is general and may not specifically apply to your child, so we encourage you to also talk to your GP, paediatrician or specialist to see if what you've learned will help your family. Hello, and welcome to our final episode of Season 3 of You Can Grow Your Own Way, a conversation for parents and carers of neurodivergent children. If you've been following us along this far, oh my goodness, thank you so much. And it's just such a pleasure to know that you're still listening. And I hope that we're still helping you out on your journey and allowing you to at least feel seen and represented. So today we're actually going to be trying something new. Little nervous, but I'm sure it will go fine. We've got two guests on with us today. So we'll be having a almost like a panel conversation, and it should be a really enlightening one, I think, for some of us who have some interesting conversations with family, friends, grandparents, etc., around parenting. We're going to be talking today about neuroaffirming parenting, what that is, and what permissive parenting is, and how those two things are different. Why one is empowering and the other kind of leads to, I suppose, a little bit of family and parenting chaos. So we'll get really far into that discussion today and share some examples. But what I want to do first is introduce our two guests. Now, having two, I didn't really know whose bio to do first. So in all honesty, I went with alphabetical order. It seemed the most fair. So we're talking with Christina Keeble today. She's a neurodiversity and educational consultant, early childhood and primary teacher, and a key worker with more than 20 years experience teaching and supporting neurodivergent children and their families. Christina has an MA in Spec Ed, grad dip in primary and early childhood teaching, and a BA honours with in psych. She provides professional development, mentoring, coaching, and consultancy services to ECE services, schools, businesses, government organisations, and families. However, Christina's most important role is as an autistic ADHD mother of two amazing neurodivergent PDA children. And we're also speaking with Leanne Tran today, who is a registered psychologist. She began her career working with children and families, and she's loved it ever since. Families see Leanne for assessments to understand autism, ADHD, specific learning disorders, and many other things. She's found that there are always people waiting to access support, especially in rural areas. So, as a result, Leanne provides online information for parents about what children need for development, how this can be adapted for kids developing differently, and practical implementation strategies. So, as you can see, we've got two incredibly intelligent women with us, and let's get into the conversation. So, neuroaffirming parenting is what we're here to talk about today. And I thought it would be best to start, as we often do, with some definitions. I was wondering, Leanne, would you like to define for us what you classify as neuroaffirming parenting?
Yeah, it's interesting that you call on me to go first because I would probably have deferred to Christina because she
Don't worry,
has lived
she's going to get to fill the
experience.
gap. It's okay.
Yeah, that's good. I guess the way I would define it for parents is a view that all neurotypes are valid and okay. And in terms of neurodiversity, we've got neurotypical people who are maybe the majority, but people don't all have to be that way. And so for me, neuroaffirming parenting is about parenting the child that you have and how their brains work, and not necessarily holding kids to a standard set up for different people, for typical people. How did I go, Christina? What do you think?
No, I think that's a great summary. I think, I've before gotten into more like detailed things, specifically when we think about parenting neurodivergent children, such as ensuring that it's respecting how they are, using their communication style and the way they communicate, ensuring that we figure out and meet their sensory needs, that we follow their interests, instead of trying to, like you said, force them. It's a lot of, I think for some parents, it can be a journey of dropping or learning to let go of the societal expectations for what a child should be doing and what that looks like and how that happens. That can be a real, yeah. For some, it's easier than others, and feeling that pressure. So neuroaffirming parenting is not responding to the external society-based pressure, but rather responding to how your child presents, what works with their brains and their needs, their communication, all of that, and going from there.
Thank you for those great definitions. I'm going to throw it out there and say, who would like to do low demand parenting?
This is that awkward moment where you get no volunteers.
Yeah.
We used to call those Tears. So, Christina, you looked like you were going to jump in. I'm going to point to you.
Yeah. So with low demand parenting, I think it takes time to actually fully understand what that means and what that looks like for the individual family and for the individual child or children in that family, because it's going to be unique to each one. And there are, I guess, certain commonalities across it, reducing demands or expectations that, um, the child isn't, or being more flexible, I should say, with demands and expectations in relation to how your child is in the moment, what their capacity is. We have to remember capacity fluctuates. And I think, again, older style, parenting would have been the expectations the same. It doesn't change, depending on the child's capacity necessarily. But what I've definitely come to figure out on my parenting journey is having a lower demand style or a flexible style. I actually like to use the word responsive, um, is it doesn't mean that there's no demand or expectation. And I think that commonly gets confused, that it's just let the kids do whatever they want, whenever they want. And that's definitely not, at least in my family and the way that we've done things, and in families that I've supported with, you still have to have boundaries and certain expectations, but there's other things that we take into consideration, and we adjust and allow and adapt, when our children either aren't coping or don't have capacity or aren't able to, for whatever reason, meet the demand or expectation, then we adjust it. But I think for me, it's becoming more and more clear and very important that low demand doesn't mean no expectation and no demand.
Yeah. And I think that's a really, really important clarification, that permissive parenting
Mm,
uh, is not, wow, I'm going
no.
to go out and say permissive parenting is not parenting. And maybe that might be a little controversial, but I think, I think putting the word permissive and parenting into the same
Yeah.
sentence, it feels like a bit of an oxymoron. Um, and there really is that distinction of understanding that even though executive function might fluctuate, even though emotional regulation might fluctuate, that doesn't mean that we just let go of everything.
Mhm,
And that our children don't need boundaries and they don't need routine and they don't need expectations.
mm,
Um, and there is a danger there. There's definitely a danger there of falling into that. And I think we can probably, I'm sure we'll highlight through the conversation around, what can come out of that and what we can see when essentially we decide it's easier to just let the children effectively run their own lives and run it their way. And that that is not neuro-affirming and it is not
mm.
low demand. It's just taking the foot off the pedal. I will also say, I think I should clarify that I think everyone has days or
Oh, yeah.
hours, where
Mhm.
that is
Yeah.
exactly what they need to do to get through that moment. And that is completely different, I think, to it being something that is a regular part of parenting. So,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. Yeah, same. Some days it's, you know what? I need to protect my mental health. So yes, you can do this, which you wouldn't normally be allowed at this time, just because I need the space and recover, and don't want to get into a discussion or argument about it. So yeah, no, it's definitely part of it. That's a coping strategy. It's a good parenting. It's different from your whole style. Like you
Mm.
said, just off you go.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You want to watch 14 hours of television? Okay.
Yeah. We don't expect our kids to be perfect 100% of the time,
Hmm.
right? So we've got to keep our parenting in that same kind of, with that same expectation that we don't have perfect capacity, and yeah,
Hmm.
80% is a fantastic thing to aim for from my point of view.
And
Yeah.
not only that, like I would never advocate for perfect parenting, because one,
Mm,
it's unachievable, unattainable, unrealistic, but it also doesn't allow our kids to see that we're human too, and we have lots of human moments, and then those moments when maybe we do lose our cool, or they see we can be flexible at certain times for certain reasons. It's role modeling it for them. If I'm doing it for self-care, I'm going to let them know why. Yes, you can do it. This would be why. And then, they learn how to do things like that themselves and get that adaptability and flexibility in those
mm,
learning moments. Yeah.
yep.
100%. 100%. The power of mistakes and repair, and
Mm,
teaching our
yeah.
children that it's okay to be fallible, while also, giving ourselves the permission and the kindness to be human through what is parenting is challenging regardless. If you want to be a conscious, engaged parent, it's going to be challenging. When you are learning to assist a child to develop in a world that doesn't fit for exactly who they are, those challenges, we need to have permission to be compassionate and kind. To ourselves
Mm.
as well as to our children. So it's so incredibly important that we don't view perfect as the model. Um, Christina, I'm going to go to you and say, what do you think is the most important for the child? What do you think is the most important thing when it comes to using neuroaffirming parenting?
There's kind of two, I'd say. Two, sorry, it can't be one. There's 2
Okay.
points that I think are equally important. One of them is supporting the child to be able to develop a positive neurodivergent identity. And what and it doesn't have to be neurodivergent, it could be neurotypical as well. So with this idea, it's parenting all neurotypes, and it's helping them understand themselves, how their brain, body, nervous system work, what they are great at, what they struggle at or struggle with. And, that's okay. It may be different to what your friend or your sister does, but that's okay, because everyone has things that has strengths, and everybody has struggles. But really helping them see and understand, whether they may be autistic or ADHD or have Tourette's or dyslexia, like helping them understand. And then also within that understanding, it kind of leads to that development of self advocacy. So being able to know when to ask for support, I think, is very key, and it's not about, because I spoke about this not long ago. It's not about necessarily that the child, who has the disability is like, oh, this is exactly what I need to be okay. But it's more that they recognize when they're not coping with something, and they go, okay, this is when I need to ask for support. And they have, an understanding of themselves to in that moment. So I think that's kind of one component, the positive neuro identity. And the other thing I think is letting them know and including them as a partner in the process of them having a voice. Um, and not that they're the parent, but more like I think back to what we do at school and with teachers. It's always important to include the student voice and ensure that they have input into their journey. And I think that's an important step as well for the kids to know they're, in our house, I know what we've done is, we're all equal members. However, occasionally, which isn't all the time, but occasionally, mom and dad pull the parent card. And actually, in this instance, we're adults, this is different. But whenever we can, we want their choice, their voice, their ideas. And if they don't agree with me, that's fine. It's how you don't agree with me. I want to foster that discussion and everything, but have them included in the process. I think those are the two points for me.
Leanne, is there anything you think you'd add to that?
Maybe, but I definitely agree. And from I don't know if it's things that I would add, but the things that come up for me when Christina was talking was firstly that how protective that is from a mental health point of view for kids, but then all people to have a good self-understanding, self-awareness and identity that they are happy about and proud of, I think is so important. But then what Christina's saying too about a child having a voice, I think is really important from my perspective as a neurotypical parent and one who works with a lot of neurotypical parents with neurodivergent kids, because it's that bridging the gap between what might be our expectation of what's the word, like that, neurotypical expectation of how things are done versus the experience of our neurodivergent kids. And so I would advocate that that's important for all kids, to have a voice in their family and with their parents, but even more so where your experience as a parent might be really different to your child's experience.
It's funny. We've had a lot of conversations about different forms of parenting interventions or support systems across, the 3 seasons that we've had thus far. And it's the first time that while you were talking, it's really light bulbed for me that, you could be a neurotypical parent with a neurotypical child, and you could listen to a lot of the strategies that are used um, to help support a neurodivergent child. And they would just aid your child in flourishing because it really is about allowing that space to be identified and be who they are, create a sense of independence, have a voice in the world and feel like they're entitled to it. And gosh, I mean, imagine if that was the messaging that went out to every single child and what kind of society we'd be living in. It's so vital for our neurodivergent children who feel like they are existing in a minority space and therefore they feel like it's harder to use their voice. It does magnify that need, but I'm just listening to it going, it's such a healthy mindset to have about seeing the child as an individual, understanding that their expectations are going to be different to yours and that it's okay for them to have a different opinion. And I just think that it's really powerful to see that it could be a seed for such a beautiful growth.
It's
And
really interesting that you said seed. Sorry to interrupt, but
no,
because it reminds me of a book called The Gardener and the Carpenter that I love by Alison Gopnik, and she talks about how the parenting as growing something in a garden versus trying to fashion something from wood into an object. So like a seed that's been planted and it's our job to just tend the garden and see what grows rather than fashion them into something that we have an idea of in our mind. And so it's so healthy for all kids. I agree.
and it's a very different viewpoint to say 40, 50, 80 years ago, where the expectation was that you were going to follow in family footsteps. So I think it's new for all of us. I also, listening to this, listeners will know that my children are adopted. And I currently am neurotypical. I've got my own quirks and crazies. I'm technically counted as being neurotypical. Some people might disagree. And I do have moments where I do wish I had an element of lived experience of a form of neurodivergence so that there is something I can completely directly relate to in terms of how I'm helping my children. And you're right, it can sometimes feel like there is such a big gap, because I will say that I had the privilege of never having to navigate that, and to truly have the compassion for that experience, I think needs to come from moments of living it. And I know, like Christina, you're very open about um, being, is it ADHD or ADHD? Because I've had it said both
Uh,
ways.
so I say ADHD, so like
Yeah.
AU. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, diagnosed autistic and ADHD when I was 37, and I'm 45 now. And I've recently acknowledged I as well am a PDAer. It's not
Mhm.
something I talk a lot about. There's a lot of, for myself personally, because that's a newer component that I'm not quite ready to I don't think I completely understand myself yet. But both my kids are, so I got diagnosed after them. They're autistic and ADHD, and they're PDAers as well. And that's what kind of led me on the journey, which is now what I'm doing with my work and everything, but also the parenting. And it led me to my diagnosis. So, yeah, I guess, we're a very multiply neurodivergent family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even my husband is neurodivergent, but due to, PTSD trauma type stuff. So it's another facet.
Mhm.
And it's, when you have, that, or at least the way it's presented in our family, uh, that many needs, that don't always align. And I think that's the tricky part. It's fine, everybody has their needs, but in our house, it can be someone self-regulating, let's say through verbally stimming or singing, and the other person is like, "Oh my gosh, just stop it," because it's like dysregulating them, and it's like those type of challenges when all of those needs clash that can make it um, super tricky to navigate.
Empathize deeply in that regard, because
Yeah.
I've got ADHD, who's also got like anxiety and suspected FASD, and then we've got ADHD with FASD, and then I've got what's looking to be a 2E, so gifted in ADHD, and watching how all those different interactions
Yeah.
come together. I mean, sometimes it's amazing.
Oh,
They're
yeah,
all seeing
absolutely.
things, yeah, they're seeing the things through the same beautiful lens. I mean, if I was to use a food analogy, it's like suddenly I've got balsamic vinegar, tomatoes, and basil, and it's all just like amazing. And then other times it's like baking soda and vinegar, and then someone's thrown oil on top, and everything's exploding. Um, and it's I think every family to some degree would have the differing personalities, but what doesn't happen in a neurotypical household is that those things that really trigger don't have such a visceral
Yeah,
response as they do for the neurodivergent brain.
yeah.
Something that's going to be sensorily overwhelming isn't going to literally make them want to feel like they're out of their skin. It's very different. So, but yeah, that mix. Whew.
It's
Thanks. It's very interesting.
it is, and then you have personalities on top of that, and you have, like, I'm very um grateful that both of my kids are very strong personality, very know what they, and I love it. And it's
Mhm,
great in a lot of
mhm,
aspects, but then
mhm.
sometimes coming up to nighttime, it's like, please, just please. It's like, it doesn't matter what you guys what we're arguing about. Let's just go to bed.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, no, it's, and I do acknowledge all families will have challenges and whatnot, but I think, you hit the nail on the head with I think it's the intensity of some things,
Mm,
and particularly the intensity of those sensory triggers, the need, and that need for that regulation and self-soothing type thing, and it can be, one very extreme need and one very extreme reactive, intense, sensitivity to things that can make it a bit extra.
so
Mm.
I'm gonna ask you a bit of a personal question. How did you start to find your way in being a neuroaffirming parent?
It started when my children were diagnosed, they were young, so I think 6 and 4. Like, it was very quick. It was like the one in school got diagnosed first, and then the one after that, and then myself. So it was kind of like very quickly. And the reason we ended up, so sorry. So with the original diagnosis, for some reason, my brain kicked into what I'd been trained and taught for years and years as a teacher. I'd worked always with autistic, neurodivergent children, including other disabilities, intellectual disability, a lot of children who were non-speaking, highly sensory. My kids, however, were very verbal. And hyperlexic. So it was kind of another aspect to it. But what I was finding is I kind of defaulted into teacher strategy mode.
Mhm,
Like, that's what I
mhm.
had. And it was not working. And not only was it not working, it took me a bit to realize that I was actually making it worse. That took a little bit longer to realize. But once I did, I was like, okay, I need to know what's actually going on here, because I certainly don't want to make their emotional dysregulation and all this stuff worse. And I actively sought out different therapists and, everything, speechy, psych, OT, like the lot, and like experienced people and all this stuff. And they would all come back with the same thing, and just, one, they would either be like, "Oh, you guys are just too tricky for me, like beyond their scope," and they disengage, which was like, that's not helpful, but okay, thank you
Mhm,
for telling me.
mhm.
Um, or they were the more experienced, I suppose, practitioners were encouraging me to go back to the very behaviorist stuff that I had used and been trained in as a teacher.
Yep.
But I kept saying, no, this isn't work. Like, I've done that. It's not me lacking It's not. I was like, this is what I
Yeah.
do. Like, it's not working. It's making it worse. And I was kind of at my wit's end, which is about the time I went and got diagnosed, because I needed the, like, mental health. I wasn't going well with all of this.
Mhm.
And then I wish I could remember who originally mentioned PDA to me, but somebody did. And it would have been through like Facebook, social media type connections, because I was doing a lot of, research and joining different groups and things. And someone mentioned it to me, and I was like, what's that? I had a little read, and I went, okay, I don't quite understand what that is. But they told me that this particular psychologist in Melbourne was going to do a talk, and I made myself get there. It took me so I live 90 minutes outside of the CBD
Mhm.
of Melbourne. And so it took me, at least because of the time, at least 2 hours to get there. It was at night. I'd arranged, I think my husband stayed home from work that night because he did night shift. I went, and it was just that light bulb moment of, this is it. Like,
Mhm.
and I was like, I actually still know the psychologist. And she remembers, because there was that night, and then I ran into her at a conference where I was learning. It was a Dr. Ross Green conference where I went to learn from him as a parent. And the night that she was presenting, everyone wanted to talk to her. And I was like, I
Mm.
have to get to this lady to talk to her, like in the breaks, right? I was like, I have to. I cannot leave this
Okay.
building. It's like, I cannot leave this building without talking to her. And she would talk for a little bit and then leave. Like, she was smart. Like, she was like, I need a
Yeah.
break too. And so, like, I knew there was one more break coming up, and I positioned myself like right at the front, and like I was the first one there. But obviously I was like so enthusiastic that she physically like stepped back. And I recognized that she looked a little terrified. I'm like, I'm so sorry. But I ended up, I don't know, she gave me some information and whatnot. And I mentioned it to her. It would have been 6 months later. And I was like, oh, you probably don't remember me. I'm Christina. Da, da, da. And I went and saw you, and she goes, oh, yes, I do remember you. Yeah, I think because I scared her. But that was the whole journey. I get, or it's the sorry, that was the journey up to the start of starting to shift and understand um the different approaches and the different ways to support our children and affirm and everything.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing
Mm,
that. Um,
Yeah.
Leanne, so as you was mentioning before, often you will be in a situation where you're talking and doing a bit of parenting work with a neurotypical parent trying to understand the neurodivergent child. So when you're
mm.
talking to them around being more neuroaffirming for their child, what are the things that you really highlight for them for their light bulb moments?
That's a good question. I think the tricky thing too about neurodivergence is that the kids aren't the same. The way that a lot of neurotypical kids are, you can kind of make a lot of generalizations, whereas for neurodivergent kids, you can't really. So it's always a case by case situation. But I think the biggest thing is understanding, because if you understand your child, I say a lot that is what gives you the empathy and then patience for your parenting. And so, and that's kind of what helped me as well. I think it was that understanding. Suddenly it clicked for me what my, you know, what my kid was experiencing and what they couldn't do and what they could do. And then that's what's led me to the shift of thinking they can't do it differently, then I need to do it differently. Or we as a family need to do it differently. So I think it's really an in-depth understanding of your kid in general, but also then about things like ADHD and autism. And so, and then in your child, how exactly that's showing up for your child. Yeah. So the example that comes to my mind is that my child cannot sit still at the dinner table. And for me, then I had to unlearn a lot of those expectations that were ingrained into me about what a good parent is, and about having certain level of control over your kids, or um, and having to let all of that go. And to me, that's a good explanation of that neuroaffirming part is thinking, why am I hanging on to that expectation? And if my child can't do it, is there a way that we can adapt so that, I'm still instilling the values? And I don't know, I guess it's probably for me mostly about values rather than behaviors. Am I still instilling the values that I want to, while letting go that little expectation, which is little to me, but it's so big for him to sit down at the table. So, yeah.
I really loved that clarification of changing from behaviors to values. And I think that's such a powerful switch in viewpoint. I mean, when we think about, so I always think the dinner table is the most beautiful example of the craziness of a neurodivergent family.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're not alone there.
Anyone ever wanting to understand it, they just need to watch a neurodivergent family at dinner time.
Dinner
And
time.
honestly, it's such a lens into their life. But so my nan, and I hold on to them like they're really toned me. My nan was a stickler for manners, like a massive stickler for manners. And, no elbows on the table, and you ate with your cutlery, and all of those different things were very, very important to her because of the generation that she'd grown up in. And she really shared that quite strongly with us. And I then realized, and it's such a beautiful way to put it, that the manners are actually just about being respectful of the other people at the table. It's actually just about showing concern for others within your space. And you don't need to show that by not having your elbows on the table. You don't need to show that by using a knife and fork. You just need to respect the fact that people are going to have different feelings about things, opinions about things. When you have conversations, they need the opportunity to speak. I'm going to share a story here. And if the person who told me this story listens, they may be horrified that I'm sharing it, but I'm doing it anyway. I know of a family of boys. They're all adults now. And we got told this story about how at Christmas time, with their family Christmas, their mum would go to the effort of making this incredibly beautiful, like country farm style Christmas spread. It's days in the making, this amazing meal. And these boys every year would have a competition on who could eat the most and the fastest.
Right.
Days of effort, and they would just load up their plate and hoover it in so fast, probably feeling incredibly sick later. And I think about it, and from someone who loves to cook, I'm like, oh my God, it makes me shudder. I would be so offended. And that to me is way worse than if somebody just decides that they need to eat with their fingers because it's easier for them.
Isn't that interesting? You love to cook. My husband is the one who loves to cook. am the opposite. Like, I love food. I love eating. And when my children were little, I breastfed them. And I was like, okay, whenever you're hungry, here we go. But once they needed to eat like real food, I was like, didn't I just feed you? Like, do you have to eat again? Like, I just did all the dishes and did them. Why do you want more? It is such a chore. And if someone was gobbling the stuff that because I also, the kids, they know when I cook because the smoke alarm goes off. My lack and my my
You and
inability
your
to
husband have a lot in
multitask.
common.
And it seems, yeah. And so I have so many stories. I actually won a competition one time. So I was pregnant with my second, and my first was nearly two, and they were in the high chair, and I remember I was making, of course, chicken nuggets, the classic like autistic thing. You didn't know they were autistic at the time, but they loved chicken nuggets. And I was also making like veggies and other stuff. And then all of a sudden, smoke alarm goes off, and I go, oh no. And I run and pull out the griller. There's like the little flames go out. And just like with the timing of a comedian, my nearly 2-year-old child goes, Mommy, another fire? Is it another fire? And I'm like, no, honey, it's not another fire. You're safe. It's okay. And I was like, oh, the trauma. This poor kid. There's so many food stories, and actually I entered a competition and won a
That's a good
kid's
one.
toy.
Yeah,
And but it's interesting that, you know, what between what Leanne was saying and what you're saying, Carly, like, it's so true about mealtime and neurodivergent families and the variety of needs and experiences. Like, I grew up as someone who is extremely I don't actually know if I would fit the definition, or if I did fit the definition of ARFID. It's kind of I always handball that to therapists who know about that. But I have so many food sensory issues, always have. And I'm an adult now, and I'm like, I have no desire to get over it. Like, I just, you know, I have my little ways. And I have one child who it's not so bad with. They're pretty good. But I have another child who is just as extreme as me, if not more so. And that was always our biggest battle when they were younger, was mealtime. And again, it was one of those situations. I had a couple of different therapists, like, you know, come in, and they had different ideas, and we were still at the dinner table at that time trying to do it that way. And one day, and it was actually probably the best piece of advice from a therapist ever. And it leads to what you were talking about, Leanne, about that, like, well, if what we're doing isn't working type situation, we got to change it. And so the therapist came, and I told her everything we'd done, and I told her the situation, and, like, you know, whatever, we'd been to a dietitian. I'd done the lot, like, made sure that I ticked all the boxes. And she ends up going to me. She goes, okay, so what do you actually want out of this? And I said, well, she goes, at the end of the day, it's dinner time now. What do you want? And I said, I just want to be able to get through a meal without all the stress and the drama and the meltdown, because my child would end up not eating because inadvertently I'd stressed him out so much that they became not hungry. Like, they went into fight or flight, became not hungry. And I was like, I just don't want that. And she said to me, she goes, okay, well, you may have to think about then how you do dinner. And because one of the things at that time, I was like, I don't want to make all these different meals, because I hated cooking anyway. And when she left, I was a little bit like, yeah, you think about it. Like, I had it's a very like RSD, like knee-jerk reaction. You don't even have kids. But I settled down, and I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? She's right. And so I ended up spoke to my husband, and then, because we, you know, his thing was sitting at the table, and mine was, I want us all to eat the same thing. Don't know why I was stuck on these things, but that's what we were stuck on. And so we ended up like switching it up, and we ended up making my child what they would eat. And my husband was able to let go of everybody sitting at the table. And so, like, at dinner time now, my husband sits at the table, I'm on the couch, and my children are, one's on the floor, one's in a sensory swing. Like, it's just like, and we're all eating, and it can be up to making 3 meals at, like, adjusted meals at a time. But my child, who had more sensory issues than I do, after 6 months of doing that, started to ask for different types of food and condiments and stuff. And and it was amazing, just because we removed the pressure. It was us
Mm,
that changed the expectation. And
Mm,
I just remember that was such a, like, it was brave of her to say, to
mm,
tell me, she was a young therapist, to say, well, you may need to rethink, what you expect.
mm,
But, sometimes it's just that, yeah, just that shift can then, and then you can look at everything like that.
mm.
Leanne, have you got an example? Anything that stands out for you where you've just gone, yeah, no, we should maybe do that. We should do that differently.
Well, yeah, so the dinner table is one, and same as you, Christina, that it's interesting that we have that expectation too, that we all
Yeah.
sit and we all eat the same thing. It's very common, isn't it? But
Yeah, it
I thought
is.
as you
Mm,
were talking, that's a great example of what we would call low demand parenting in practice, I would say, is dropping that expectation that you all sit together or you all eat the same thing. And I don't know, there's a couple. One is probably affection is one thing, and
mm,
I am a person who loves hugs, and my oldest kid loves hugs as well, so we're a perfect match. My middle child, not so much.
yeah.
And so that's something I've definitely had to let go of. And same as for the dinner table thing, and the reason is because it affects the relationship. And so if I was expecting things that my child didn't want to give and wasn't
Mm.
happy to give, that was ruining our relationship. And so it seems like a little thing, a hug. It's definitely nothing I would ever want to force on my kids, but even just seeking one a lot was difficult for him. And so then, we were having more times where we would be butting heads and
Mm,
if our expectations are off. Um, yeah, so it's a little thing. Now I get more of a high five,
mm.
which I will take happily, or a shoulder charge is his way of showing off, so which is fine with me,
Can I
fine with
ask how old he
me.
is?
Yeah, he's 14 at the moment,
Okay,
yeah.
interesting. I've got
Yeah.
a like my 7-year-old, he loves a bit of a and that's his way of showing love, like a little punch or a little,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's
Uh,
and
yeah.
the way I see it is too, it's like you mentioned at the very start, Christina, seeing or responding to how your kids prefer to communicate. And that's what it is. It's a way of
Mm,
showing affection, whether it's a knock in as you walk by the kitchen. It's a way of showing affection, and it's his way. And so if he's still showing it to me, that's a win in my book. No matter how he
absolutely.
shows it.
Absolutely. And actually, it's so funny, because a similar situations growing up. So my mother's from Argentina, and they immigrated to the States when she was a teenager. And I grew up, and later on, I had a stepmother who was also Latina. And I grew up in a very Hispanic, like Latin American culture area anyway, in the States. And because I grew up in it, you just, every time you'd, like, see somebody, you hug them and you give them a kiss on the cheek, and depending on which
Mm,
country they're from, it'll be one cheek and then the other, or it'll just be one. But literally, anybody, if you see somebody, you say goodbye, you do that, you show up to, their house, you do, so and it's, you don't just do it to the one person, you do it to the whole family. And so that was just part of how I interacted with family and people in general. And when I had my kids, so I have one similar, one that, like, loves the hugs and kisses and deep pressure, like all of that stuff. And then I've got another one who's, like, always tenses up before you, like, even, like, touch their shoulder or something. There's that initial tense before they relax. And I remember when they were little, they would give me their forehead or their
Mm,
arm, like if
mhm.
I was going to give them a kiss goodnight or something. And I remember I had some family coming over and I was trying to explain the cultural differences, and I could just see, because I wasn't even thinking, like, until I saw their face, I was like, oh, they are terrified. And I was like, you do this, because my stepmother was coming over, and they were like, I can't do that. And I'm like, oh, of course, no, of course you can't. Like, I hadn't even like put two and two together, and so then I had to explain why, and all of that. And it just, it's just another one of those examples. And again, it wasn't that I was thinking, "Oh, you have to do this." It didn't even dawn on me, I think, because it was just part of culturally how, I interact. But obviously, like, it they were terrified, their face, and they were so thankful when I did the other thing, and they ended up similarly, I think it was high five that they gave
Mm,
as a good night and stuff. Um, but, there's those cultural aspects that'll come into it as well for different cultures and neurodivergence. And it's yeah, it's just a really interesting space of having to stop and go, okay, wait a minute, that's not there, this isn't necessary. Like, yes, I like it, like I like to give a kiss and a hug, but it's definitely not the only way. And that we got to find what works for them.
I think
mm,
it's interesting to pull out of that as well. Sometimes there are those things that we don't even realize that we've chosen to be neuroaffirming about until we're confronted with something that is the opposite. I find that school is a really great example of that.
Mm,
You realize the places that you have made adjustments so that your child
yeah.
feels comfortable and isn't pushing themselves out of the scope of, of where they are comfortable. And
Mhm.
then they go into a school environment that has expectations, and may not have the same level of compassion and empathy. It's something we definitely see when they come home, that they haven't had that same level of support and understanding. And it can really open your eyes up to the quiet little adjustments that you make to ensure that they are feeling like they are themselves. Um, and then to be able to translate that into a school environment so that that can be understood can be, a battle in itself. And I guess the thing is, that's the thing as well with neuroaffirming parenting, that we can create these beautiful safe spaces for them when they're at home, which is so important for them to have.
Hmm.
But sometimes we do have to be prepared and aware that they won't necessarily receive that when they're out in the big world. And so when they come home and get it again, it's all that more important for them.
mm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Yeah, and the need to advocate sometimes for them to get that as well, and like with you, Christina, to advocate for them to interact with other people in a different way, or more so advocate for other people to interact differently with your
Yeah.
kids.
I do, I have, thankfully, at this point, I guess, with my work and things, I'm getting schools contacting me, which is wonderful, because they're seeking, ways to support kids that are struggling, or they're wanting more neuroaffirming practice and trying to understand what that looks like. And that's definitely, I've found, the most effective way to get change in a school or in a classroom. Um,
Yeah.
but 90, like, I can probably say 100%, 99% of what I say is it's the staff or the school expectations or the policies or whatever it is that actually need adjusting. It's never
Mm,
the student. Not that some students don't need to learn things, but it's usually the challenges are in reaction to non-affirming environments or expectations or whatever. So it's definitely, yeah, it's definitely an ongoing space with lots of room for support and advocacy.
I
mm,
was also going to jump in. There's something that I often say. It's generally to family, adult family, when you hear things when they're like, but they did this first. Like if they respond in an aggressive or a forthright way to one of the children, oh, but they did this. And I often turn around and I say, yeah, they probably did. Just like to point out, you're 54.
we've always got more capacity as adults than
Uh,
kids do. I mean, technically, I know in that Mel Robbins' book recently, she was quoting someone that said most adults have challenges with regulating emotions, and maybe that means that 50-something person is operating around an 8-year-old level. I'm not sure, but we've got better ability to problem solve, to manage our emotions, to control our environments, all of that stuff. So I say to parents a lot too, the fastest way to change is often for us to do it as well.
Mhm. Yeah, completely.
No,
Christina,
absolutely.
what were you
And
gonna jump in and say?
yeah, I was gonna say one of the things I like, I do tend to share it more with educators, I think, and teachers, but it's definitely something that as a parent, it helps me when I share it with others because it reminds me as a parent that, oh yeah, that's right. Like
Mhm.
it's just one of those things that the more I talk about it, I'm like, okay, Christina, you can do this better when you get home, that kind of thing. And it's actually talking about very basic full childhood brain development and how it actually plays
Mm.
out, how long adolescence actually is. It actually doesn't end till closer. I think for females now they're getting closer to 28 instead of 25. And once, once you explain to people, like, they're kind of like, oh, and it's like, it helps me too. And it's like, that's right. This is, and just because we've seen a kid do something once doesn't mean that's been consolidated. And we have to give them grace and not have higher expectations of the kids than we do ourselves. We tend to give ourselves more grace sometimes. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and I know with our family, both myself and my husband have gone back to seeing a professional like psychologist or and psychiatrist to help us because if we have all of that that stuff that happened in our past or whatever, be it trauma or whatever, if you don't process it and deal with it, it can't help but come out and reduce your capacity at different times. And so it's made such a huge difference since it's an ongoing and probably a lifelong process, but it's definitely made a huge difference us working on our own issues, which have nothing to do with the kids, but build our capacity in terms of parenting.
Listening to that, there's two things that came out of that for me. One of them is how much we do tend to lead with our emotional response first and our
Mm,
science response second. And how you were saying it's really great to remind yourself around,
mm,
around brain development for children and adolescents. And I
mm.
completely agree with that. I mean, gosh, I wish that we were given a lot more
I
access
know.
to the understanding of neuroscience and brain development, because I think the way that people responded to children would be
Would be
very different if they really understood what was possible in their brains. In fact, I saw the most amazing graphic today, and it's not even about the brain. It was the x ray of a 4-year old's hand and an x ray of a 7-year old's
yeah,
hand and showing the difference. And it was just to talk about don't have fine motor expectations of a 7-year old and put them on a 4-year old because their body literally can't do it. A baby doesn't walk because it doesn't form kneecaps until a certain point in time. There are things that our bodies and our brains are literally not capable of, no matter how much we wish they could be. Um,
exactly.
and falling in line with that, I think the other thing is remembering sometimes, and it can be really challenging when you have a 14-year-old, or for me, the hardest is a 9-year-old looking at me and they've got the 9-year-old height and the 9-year-old shoulders. And, they also have the most amazing vocabulary. So they'll come out with some 9-year-old words. But the reality is, when I look at their executive functioning and I look at their developmental age, and they're 3. And I have to remember that, and
Mm,
I check myself and go, I can't expect a 3-year-old to always be able to put on their shoes. It's not going to
mm,
happen. And
And
so
and
sometimes I need to
yeah.
help.
And that understanding of understanding there's the actual age and then there's developmental age, but then there's different developmental components as well. And that's the thing with neurodivergence in children is
Mhm.
that you get those really spiky profiles where in some areas, like I said, especially my eldest, they were hyperlexic. They had language very early on, and just it was this crazy strength. And it made it harder for me and for other adults. So once they got older and started to go to like kinder and stuff, they were so advanced. It's like, no, wait a minute. They're 3. They're not 6 or 7 because they may have been speaking like that, but
Mm.
emotionally, they definitely were at least 3. So that spiky profile and then having other challenges in other areas. And I think as parents tend to be pretty good at getting to know our children and seeing these differences, and we're very, proud of certain things, and we're like, okay, we need to work on this. But when they start to get into the care of somebody else, and someone who's a teacher, an educator, or whoever, sometimes even other family members looking after it, and that understanding may not be there, and it can lead to
Uh-huh.
unrealistic expectations, maybe not across the board, but
Mhm.
definitely in certain areas. Yeah, it's definitely,
Mm.
yeah, it's definitely another challenge.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And it falls so strongly in line, I think, with when you were saying know your child. Like, if you want to be
Yeah.
truly neuroaffirming for your child, it is understanding what that profile looks like, and
Mm.
not expecting that it's going to be more of a plateau, that it's going to look like a mountain range, and we need to know where those peaks and those valleys are, so that we cannot butt heads in places that they can't do anything about. They're not doing it to be difficult. They're not doing it because they want attention. They're doing it literally because at that point, in that moment, they don't have the capacity to do it. Um, and as you mentioned, fluctuating capacity, which, oh my goodness, I have
Mm.
to admit myself, I find that on some days I find that so challenging.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. You're not
it's just
alone.
like,
We all
I'm
do.
fine. No, you
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and
Yeah.
you've got 3 kids, you try to get them all out of the house, and you totally know how to do that. Why can't you do that right now? Um, but yeah, putting yourself in that place, of going, but maybe there's something that means that they can't.
Oh,
And what is it today that might mean that they can't?
Mm.
You
Or
know?
what are the things? Yeah, I think
yeah. Yeah.
lots of times I find parents are looking for the one thing, but it's more than one usually. It might
Yeah.
be a couple of small little things. Yeah.
Yes. I don't know if you guys know the book, The Boat, the Who Sank the Boat? The
I
kids'
love
book,
that
Who
book.
Sank the Boat?
Yeah.
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 I
Yep.
think that that's a really great example of that. It looks like it was that, but it was probably a little bit of the 7 things that all led up to it that
Yeah,
caused it to happen. Yeah.
that's right.
I think it's really important for us to make sure we also talk about what can happen when we choose not to be neuroaffirming. And the reason I say that is that as parents, we're in such a position. I'm going to say power. It's probably a really volatile word to use, but it truly is. We're in a position of power over the growth, development, and emotional well-being of our children. And so I'm sure you've both seen it. Leanne, have you seen some examples of children when you can tell that they've been in a non-neuroaffirming environment?
Yeah, and I think it's um there's a range of different responses and not to minimize it, but I was going to say down the end, but that kind of minimizes it. But I wanted to talk a little bit about masking because I think
Mm,
that's what happens if we're not neuroaffirming and we hold kids to neurotypical expectations, that masking occurs where they kind of just pretend, hold it together and not be their true selves. But then I think what develops from that, in my experience, is then lots of mental health vulnerabilities and things like
Mm.
anxiety and depression and potentially self-harm and, worse things than that as well. Uh, and that's certainly what I hear from a lot of, I'm thinking particularly about autism here, but from lots of autistic adults is, all of these experiences of being expected to be something that you're not and expected to fit in where you don't is, traumatic, and all of those little traumatic well, I say little, but I don't mean that. I mean cumulative
That's good.
yeah.
traumatic experiences build up.
Mm,
And then, yeah, for me, that's the real risk, is those mental health challenges that then are really serious and need to be dealt with, and often come out in adolescence, or in my practice anyway, need to be dealt with. But then also you've still got to unpack all of that other stuff. It's almost like layer upon layer of thing. And I think what I see of parents or children where that parents are neuroaffirming is there's not so much layering of all of that difficulty that then needs to be unpacked. Yeah. And then I think even without that happening, because it doesn't happen to all kids, that kind of mental health and difficulty. But I think what you would still end up with is an adolescent or an adult who then feels this disconnect between who they are and who they're showing the world. And that's a really, really difficult life to live, I think.
Yeah, it's so a few episodes ago, we did a topic around comorbidities, and we did talk about the statistics. And it's a big, shocking thing to talk about, but it's also
Yeah.
really important to air about the much higher suicide rates of the neurodivergent community compared to the neurotypical population. And I think the reason I want to say it is not to scare parents in any way, but actually to empower them, because that data is coming from generations that did not have the opportunity to receive neuroaffirming parenting or to have themselves feel seen and create a strong neurodivergent sense of identity. And so it's actually a really amazing point in time where we now have this opportunity to completely flip that script if we choose to allow them a neurodivergent child to celebrate who they are, advocate for who they are, and feel proud of of themselves, and to
Mm.
make those statistics totally different. And that comes from learning and conversation and awareness and advocacy. Which, look, let's be honest, that's why the parents who are listening to this. So, yay to you! Pop a little streamer. Um, but, if we're not aware of that, then we can't understand the power of the change.
Mm.
Yeah. It's something that
Absolutely. I think sometimes too it gives that, changing how we do things, or the expectation from what was ingrained in us growing up, is hard, but sometimes understanding the seriousness of what our kids might experience if we don't is what can give us that motivational push to actually move through that discomfort of saying, well, look, it's uncomfortable for me to tell the school this or tell grandma this, but I'm going to do it because I don't want my kid to ever feel that way.
Yes, such a good point.
yeah.
Christina,
Um
you looked like you had something you wanted to say before.
yeah, just I guess going on from what you both were just talking about, it's something the so I'm not a mental health practitioner, but I do key work and support families and do consults with parents in the early years in particular. And unfortunately, there still is that experience um, of self-harm, suicide ideation, and suicidal attempts in under 12s. That it's something that I've spoken about with parents, and I don't go into it on air because it's too there's just it's too heavy. But I guess I'm saying
It
it for the
is.
parents who
Yeah.
are listening. For the parents who are listening, if your child ever does express something like that, or you might notice self-harm, or they're saying statements about not wanting to be here anymore, one, no, you're not alone. This isn't an unusual experience. I wish it was, but it's not. And there is a lot of support out
Mm.
there that you can get, and a lot of great networks and communities that you can connect to as well. um, and I say that among the parent communities that we have online and whatnot. Um, so it's definitely always something to be taken seriously. I know through experience, when very, very little children say it, it's generally they're expressing how horrible they feel and they don't know what else to say. They don't really have a concept of what that means. But still, it's something to seek support with. And definitely, we're all learning, and these kids are going to have this idea of self and support and everything, and like, change the world and make it wonderful, and be that support for others in the future. But I think the most so that's one thing. I think, what you were asking Leanne about children who aren't raised in a neuroaffirming space, or what I see is the vulnerability that is compounded by compliance. And children with disabilities in
Mm,
general,
mm,
statistically, are extremely, extremely vulnerable to predators. Um, and unfortunately, society's structures like school, they do have some are better than others, but there is a heavy compliance and conformity component. And when you have a child who's neurodivergent, if they become used to doing as the adult says because the adult said so, and they're getting that message in multiple areas, that can, if the child has that oomph to like push back on it and not accept it, they generally get labeled a
mm,
behavior problem. Um, or that goes away, that spark,
mhm,
and then they just switch to compliance, or they may just be a gentler type of child who would never push back. And that heavy focus on compliance really compounds that vulnerability to unfortunately all the predators that are out there and take advantage of kids and teens and whatnot.
mm.
So I think as hard as it is, because I know, like, there's that the way I was raised, and sometimes I can hear my mother's voice in my head. I love my mom. So I can just hear and I'm like, no, don't say that, Christina. That's not what you're gonna say. And it's like, because growing up, you didn't backtalk. Like, that was like the whole thing. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, that was the big focus. And I'm like, nope, hear them out, teach them how they can disagree with me respectfully, and let's discuss this. Don't squash it. And it's very hard, like I said, when it's late at night and you're just like, I just want to go to bed. Let's just go to bed.
Mhm.
But I
Mm,
think it's such an important skill to and give him that confidence to be able to not just listen to what we say, and kind of guide it, and help that grow and whatnot.
Sorry, that
mm,
actually feeds really nicely into the dangers, I guess, around permissive parenting and not providing boundaries and structure. Um, and I suppose, Leanna, might start with you from your perspective. And I'm wondering, have you seen it in play, and in your work, what do you see are the dangers of not providing that strong parental framework of giving children the knowledge of where they can push to and come back from?
mm. I think, yeah, I do see it, and I view it from an attachment point of view, really, in my work. And attachment's really all about developing that good relationship between a parent and a child so that um, they feel safe, really. Kids need to be safe, or, they need to be safe. They need to feel safe as well in order to grow and learn and develop. And so, from that relationship point of view, I think I use the circle of security program a lot because it's really simple for parents. It talks about, as a parent, trying to be bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind. Kind at the end. It's not all about authority and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And so the view I would have is that having boundaries and things is about being the wiser person, and the stronger and bigger person. It conveys safety to kids because you are kind of in charge of their world and their life. That doesn't mean you have to be making all of the decisions. It just means that you're the person who is um, essentially letting them know they're safe so they can relax and then just play and explore the world as kids are meant to do. And so then without those boundaries and things, we can go too harsh on one end and be really like a dictatorship, authoritarian regime, maybe. And on the other end, there's that permissiveness where anything goes. And when it's anything goes, kids don't really have that feeling of safety, of the boundary, and like you said, don't know how far they can explore, and sometimes don't feel safe to come back to a parent because they might not be getting that reassurance and care for when they're not feeling great or emotionally dysregulated.
Mm.
And so I think sometimes it can get really confusing as to how to do parenting within keeping a boundary, but making it not too firm and not too loose. And so I think that's where, if we're thinking about the low demands or it and neuroaffirming parenting, for both of those ideas, for me, it's about thinking about, like, why do I have this certain expectation? Is it important? And for me personally, it comes back to values I'm trying to instill rather than compliance or correctness of behavior. So it's about, why do I have the boundaries? And then it's also about being collaborative or flexible as well. So it's not always a hard and fast boundary. It's one that sometimes there are some that don't move, and they're usually safety ones or
Mhm.
moral ones.
Mhm.
And there are ones that do move a little bit. And for me, that's about, do you have the capacity today? Do I have the capacity today? Does it really matter? Are we going to change our mind because we've decided that, we want to do our family a bit differently, or it's not working out? So yeah, that's how I see the difference, I guess, between maybe permissive parenting and then low demand parenting, where it's something where you're kind of constantly thinking about what you want your expectations to be, and what you want to hold your kids to, versus letting anything go.
I
Yeah.
think sometimes, there are just things that as an adult you've learned and had the opportunity to learn. And I'm going to talk about dopamine here. And so that knowledge allows us to see outcomes that our children can't see. And so I think, if I use dopamine as an example of the difference between a boundary and letting permissive parenting happen, and I use my kids for an example, I have very dopamine hungry children, and anything that gives them dopamine. All three of them have a variation of ADHD, so they are always wanting anything that's going to give them that dopamine buzz. And that can be technology, that can be food, that can be risky behavior. Um, and so if I was to, instead of low demand, if I use that as an excuse for permissive parenting, I can't be bothered with the fight. If they
Mm,
want it, it's going to let them have it. Um, we would be a house where, well, FASD and ADHD together, the low dopamine there, what they want is risky behavior. So we'd be taking knives and we'd be lighting matches. And, those are the kinds of behaviors that would come out that would make them feel good in the moment. Mr. Nine is definitely all about food, so sugar. Sugar.
mm,
And so if there weren't firm boundaries around what was in the house and what we had access to, then we'd constantly be on sugar and technology. There is no YouTube allowed in our house. That is a really firm boundary, um, because Mr. Nine does not have the capacity to stop the feed. And that's, once again, it's just that's the thing when we think about being parents, that we have to turn around and think about, what are the life lessons that we have learned, where we can actually put things in place to protect our children from things that we would not want them to experience. We may have experienced ourselves, it's a knowledge. And Miss Five, she steals coffee beans. So we have to hide
chocolate
and lock up
covered
our coffee beans.
chocolate covered coffee
No,
beans,
just
or
coffee
just
beans.
regular coffee beans?
No, regular coffee beans. Yeah. Yeah. No joke. We have to hide our coffee jar. With our coffee machine, we can only fill the grinder up to the point where you can't put your hand in where the burrs are. Because she steals coffee beans.
Oh, that's funny.
She
That's
I
funny.
mean, I don't know her, but she sounds like the type that you wouldn't wanna caffeinate.
No,
Yeah,
no, it'd
no.
be like having the Tassie Devil from, like, Warner Brothers running loose in the house. He's busy enough as it is.
Bless.
And, like, without getting way too serious into things, I think they're really great examples of times when we have to provide boundaries and frameworks because as adults, we know better and we shouldn't be making
Mhm,
our children have to learn those lessons the hard way. They're not the kind of lessons they do need to learn the hard
mm,
way.
mm,
And we can just step in and actually aid them in their progression in life. So,
Yeah. I've
yeah.
I've found too that I mean, most of the time and I have to put boundaries in place with kids, that I work with as well. Um,
Uh,
Most of the time with a I mean, yeah, maybe it's gonna sound simplified, but I think you can get a long way by having an honest explanation of things at a developmental level, um, explaining why you're saying what you're saying and then what the options are within that boundary. It's not always easy, don't get me wrong. And there are times too when in my parenting I choose not to see things because if I saw it, I'd have to enforce the boundary. But that's the 80-20 rule again. But it comes from that. I think if you approach it from a place of mutual respect and open, honest communication to begin with, you're starting the right way.
such a great
yeah.
point. I mean, people say don't treat children like tiny adults, and
Mm,
100% don't treat children like tiny adults. But at the same time, don't treat children like imbeciles or robots.
mm,
No,
mhm,
and it's interesting, Leanne. So I actually one of the slides that I do a lot of like PowerPoint presentations and stuff, and one of the slides that I have is explain the why, and that's the
Wow.
slide because that's the strategy. And I, it works really well. I'm guessing it works with all children, but it works really well with neurodivergent children, explaining
Mm.
the why, and definitely, even just part of it, I think, is we have to know, we have to understand. Like, I'm always wondering why something's happening, right? And one of the differences of my husband and I is that he's very much like if he takes the kids to, let's say, the doctor for a reason and he'll do, whatever the doctor says and everything, but he never asks the questions I would ask. And I'll go, "Well, what about this? Did you ask it?" And he's like, "No, they told me. They know." And I'm like, "No." I was like, "But you need to understand why they're saying this." It's just it's a difference, and I find that a lot of kids who even don't wanna do something, if they understand why, they're like, "Oh, yeah, okay." Like, it makes sense to them, and it's like they can see the reason behind it, and a lot of times they'll engage with it. Not always, um, but I think the other side of that is that it's respectful,
Mm.
and I don't know about the whole concept of don't treat them like little adults, but I think we need to treat them with the respect we'd give an adult because I wouldn't
Yes,
respond well if
yes.
somebody told me to do something and then didn't tell me
Mm.
why or, I've always spoken to kids the way I'd speak to my friend or I'd want someone to speak to me with
Mm.
consideration and, you know, not just it's time to sit down. Pardon? It's time to sit down. Like
mm,
nobody
mhm,
would, no adult would respond well to that. So I think it's more about making sure that we give them the same level of respect that we do adults, and that role models it for them as well.
And just to clarify, that statement about not treating them like little adults is normally around emotional and social expectations.
Oh,
So
mm,
right.
don't have
Gotcha.
emotional and
Yeah,
social
yeah.
expectations from adults on children
Oh,
because I
yes.
100% agree. They deserve just as much
Yeah.
respect as your peers would receive. And that's also, I mean, if we get into if you want your child to respect you, you need to be respectful of the child. And that is how respect is built.
And
And
we need we
it's
need to
role
do it
model.
first. Yeah.
Correct.
mm,
Correct.
Yeah.
mhm,
And learn from us.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, every single thing that we've been talking about, when we treat our children in a neuroaffirming way, what they're also learning when they go out into the world and they engage with peers who have different types of neurodivergences or are neurotypical, they then will approach it with the same way that difference is acceptable and I can be understanding and empathetic and I can provide a space for that. And so we're role modeling that with them every single day that we use that approach with our children.
mm. Mhm.
Absolutely.
Um, Ladies, I'm going to have to wrap this up because we've had a big, meaty conversation. It's been really fun. I've really, really enjoyed having both of you as part of this discussion, and I think we've had a lot of laughs, which is a really lovely thing to do. So, a
Yeah.
huge amount of gratitude from me and all of our listeners for having you do my first double guest episode and the last episode of season 3. So a couple of milestones there. So thank you so much for your time and your contributions today.
Thank you so much for
You're so
having
welcome.
me. Yeah, really enjoyed it.
Be sure to check the show notes on our website for any links and references. You can find us at youcangrowyourownway.podbean.com. And if you found this episode helpful, we would love you to help us get the word out. You can share the podcast, tell a friend, and be sure to click the follow or subscribe button so you can access all our new episodes. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram, where we would love to connect with you. You Can Grow Your Own Way recognises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of this place, now known as Australia. We're coming to you from Jabberung, Jawajali and Wadawurrung country, the country of our guest speaker, and from wherever you are listening. We respect the elders of the past and present, and we share our friendship and kindness.